I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do.
Hi, everybody. So it is a few days after the Academy of Motion Pictures and Sciences gave out their nominations for the Academy Awards, the 96th Annual Academy Awards, the list of Oscar hopefuls. And as usual, every year it's pretty much the same thing. There are a few frontrunners that gobble up nominations as if they're M&Ms. And then there are the dark horses that everybody pumps for that you're pretty sure it's not going to happen. And then there are the snubs. There's usually some big name snubs, but there's almost always the snub that any horror fan has in their mind. Horror movies very rarely get any form of nomination in the Academy Awards, and even less do they ever win. It takes a small miracle, although it has been getting better over the last several years. Now, the thing that happens every year, especially with us horror fans, but I won't just say it's just horror fans, I'll say it's independent film lovers. I will say that it is science fiction lovers, comedy lovers, people who are not quite in that drama wheelhouse. All of us are represented a little bit better these years, but at the same point, we all pretty much say the same thing, like, why do we care about the Oscars, and how can they come up with this? How can they go with this idea of there being one movie to rule them all, right? It's not sports, we'll say. Just about every year you'll hear somebody say, this isn't sports. How can we have this competition? Why is there a competition in art? And then, of course, there's the idea that it is way too arbitrary. How do you take all these different movies and compare and contrast them? There's so many different things about each and every movie. And that's very true. I mean, if you're to look at what we've got this year, so Best Picture, American Fiction, Anatomy of a Fall, Barbie, The Holdovers, Killers of the Flower Moon, Maestro, and oh, wait, it's not over yet because now we've extended how many movies can actually be picked, which makes it even harder on that arbitrary list. There's also Oppenheimer, there's Past Lives, Poor Things, and The Zone of Interest. Now that's an awful lot of movies to put in as nominees and then go, well, you know what? We're just going to have to see how these compare and contrast. It becomes really obvious if you take a look at it that it's really hard to do. It happens to me all the time with horror movies. Now, the thing is, I understand how hard it can be to pick movies that are best ofs because I have a hard time just coming up with like a top 10 list. But this year, I'm going to finally do it. I'm going to try and come up with something, but it's going to be probably more than 10. In fact, I know that it's already more than 10 movies that I'm going to pick, but I'm going to come up with what I thought was the best work in 2023. I think, though, before I get to that, I wanted to talk a little bit about this phenomenon that we have every year about how we get upset about the Oscars as people who love horror movies. I'm of two minds about the Oscars. I think a lot of how I look at the Oscars is kind of like how Michael O'Donoghue, the late writer of Saturday Night Live, he was on the first season, how he looked at the Emmys. So he was kind of the punk rock guy of the writer's room at Saturday Night Live. He was the angry man. He was misanthropic. He was acerbic, and he put that into the humor. He was a surrealist. A lot of his humor was what would be considered sick humor. He had a real bite to him, and he wanted to bite the hand that feeds. He was coming into television wanting to be this writer that kicked down all the doors of anything that was going on in television, and he put it into Saturday Night Live. So, of course, what happens? He gets nominated for Best Writer or Best Writing for a television series on the Emmys. And the entire time, you can read this in the book Saturday Night, And he essentially says, the entire time that we're up for the Emmys, I'm saying, fuck the Emmys, fuck all that bullshit. None of that matters. That's not why I do art. It's arbitrary. It's bullshit. And then he says he's on his way over in the limo and the tux is itching. He's like, fuck this place and fuck all this stuff. And why am I having to sit in the back of this thing? This is such a waste of time. All these people are fake. And then the door opens to the limo and he gets out. And he sees everyone waiting for him, and the flash bulbs are going off, and people applaud. And he goes, and I bought into the whole thing. He goes, all of a sudden, it's like I was having that acceptance speech in a mirror as a kid. But I think deep down, in the beginning, when we fall in love with movies, we also fall in love with the idea of the Oscars. It is the thing of wanting to be acknowledged and seen for once. And that is something that horror fans don't get a lot of. I think that part of the reason that we are so protective of our genre is that it is a space of communication that we have with other fans and with ourselves that feels as if we have been seen, that we are legitimized in some of the ways that we think about the world, that there is an art form that expresses that, and it feels as if it's just a puzzle piece that kind of connects everything else that becomes us. I think we get our dedication to this by being slighted and snubbed. And that is one of the things that the Oscars does for us. It gives us an enemy, maybe, that we continue to work against. And so the way that I'm looking at this list right now that I'm going to do, yes, believe it or not, I'm going to do a top 10 list. With this list, the way that I'm looking at it is that I am going to try and give you what I consider the best movies that I have seen for horror. This is my killer elite. These are the movies that I think really try to do something different and succeeded, or did something that I've seen done before but exceptionally well with a different twist, something that just made me laugh really hard or really excited me, hit me as something truly original, gave me a new monster, whatever it was. That's the reason that these movies are on this list. I will say that some of these movies are not going to resonate with everybody. I tried not to go for just nothing but the big movies that people saw. I was trying to find ones that were really strange and a little idiosyncratic. I will say that many of my top horror films of 2023 were movies that were done by first-time directors. Several of them were foreign films. Many of them were written or directed by women. Nothing less than 7 first-time directors in this list of 14. So half of the movies that I'm picking, the people who made these movies were fresh, coming in with different ideas. And I think that this bodes well. What I will say about 2023 is I thought it was a pretty damn good year for horror movies. There was something there for everyone. And if you didn't feel there was anything original happening in horror, if you felt that the movies were not really good horror movies or that they were half measures, whatever you might think, let me be the first to tell you that that's because you're old. But anyway, I've talked quite a bit. I want to get on to what the movies are. We've got quite a few to go through. So without further ado, here is my killer elite, the best horror, in my opinion, of 2023. One of the really cool things about being a horror fan right now is the advent of streaming services. Because of those streaming services, movies that may have not played in your country or even opened in theaters at all are able to appear on streaming services. And there's multiple streaming services that cater a little bit to horror and some that specialize in horror. Some of these movies may have never been seen even 5 to 10 years ago, but because of the advent of streaming, they now have a place to land. So this movie that I want to talk about is one that kind of surprised me that I had never heard of. And one of the reasons that it surprises me is that there are people in it that star in it that are names They are people who are actually rather popular right now. The big one being Anthony Starr. And if you're a fan of Marvel-esque type of things, but you're a little edgier, you probably know about The Boys. You probably know that he plays Homelander. There's also another actor that's pretty well known, Lizzie Kaplan. Has been on a lot of shows and movies. Probably horror fans know her from Cloverfield. And between these two, that's usually enough to get even a low-budget movie to have their faces plastered on the front cover or on the poster, and people will come to see it, or at least it'll get bought up. But that didn't happen with this movie. This movie is Cobweb. And Cobweb is the first feature of director Samuel Bowden. I believe that Samuel had done a few TV movies before this, or miniseries, but this is his first feature film, and it's pretty assured, to say the least. How did I not know about it? Cobweb was an interesting fatality of the Barbie and Oppenheimer time period, Barbieheimer. It opened, unfortunately for Cobweb, the same week as Barbie and Oppenheimer, so everything was about those two movies. And a movie like Cobweb, a low-budget horror film, disappeared in that. But I really am glad that I didn't know much about Cobweb. I did watch a little bit of the trailer. Cobweb is a movie that I think is best if you don't know a lot about it going in. Suffice to say, I feel that it is a modern fairy tale. It's put in the modern world. So the story is about Peter. He's an 8-year-old boy. He lives in this house with very emotionally distant parents, very overbearing. There was something that happened on Halloween night several years earlier. A child disappeared, and because of that, Halloween is verboten in the house, and of course that's all Peter wants to do. And we find out why as the movie goes on, what had happened in the past and what's happening in the present. All of that stuff kind of rolls in. What we do have, though, are these two parents that almost feel like they're out of a grim fairy tale, and the actors do play them rather large in that way. The thing about Peter is that he's afraid of his own shadow, and he's hearing some kind of scratching and knocking on the wall in his bedroom. And he feels that someone is behind the wall and is moving around the house. And the thing, the person, the entity starts talking to him. And the name of the entity is Sally. And Sally says that she was put behind the wall by Peter's parents. So cut from that, and what we do is we have Peter at school being an emotional mess. 8-year-old kid having to deal with parents that are unhinged, and all of a sudden he's having all these things happen where somebody's behind the wall talking to him. So he starts drawing these pictures, and his teacher notices the drawings and of course goes to the conclusion by seeing black all over the paper and something behind the wall scratching, and the kid in the bed looking scared. Something's going on in that house that's not right. So the teacher wants to try and get involved and see if he is maybe abused by this parent. And from this starts this weird circle of events. As Peter continues to get conversations with Sally behind the wall, he starts to tell her a little bit about his life because he's a super lonely kid, and he tells her about his bullies. And she tells him to take care of one of his bullies in a pretty shocking way. And from that starts a lot of concern about what's happening with Peter. And the story continues with Sally asking to get out of the wall. Now, of course, any horror fan worth their salt is going, oh no, you can't leave this thing out from behind the wall. Where it goes from here, how he gets behind there, what the house is built like, is where this movie really gets pretty interesting. What I will say about Cobweb is that I really appreciate, this is one of the very few movies that I know that has a real taste of Halloween. Autumn in the East with pumpkins and Halloween spirit and the way things look. It was evocative of the time. You could almost smell like apple cider and dry dead leaves. It's really powerful and really done well. There are very few movies that even touch it. I would say that it's right up there with Trick or Treat or Halloween, the original, Or even better, though, I would say Lady in White. And Cobweb gets a lot of its power from feeling as if it is told through a child's eyes, that it has this really good versus evil kind of feel to it, that there's a fairy tale aspect to it, but it's not just that. Where the movie goes, once Sally's influence becomes very strong on Peter, is not where you expect it to go. There are several moments of what the fuck that are in this movie that I go, I can't believe that just happened. I'm not sure. Maybe how this movie does those scenes might be a reason why it got pulled pretty quickly instead of trying to give it a chance somewhere. But it now gets a chance. Cobweb is available on streaming. And I don't want to say any more about it. I think that you will enjoy it if this sounds like the kind of thing that you like. And if there's one thing that I will say, the thing that really put it over the top for me to recommend it as one of the killer elite of 2023 is I love a good monster. I love a monster that kind of creeps me out when I see it. And so there's a creature in this movie well worth waiting to the last reel to see. I know that I started the show by poking a little bit of fun at the older horror fan who doesn't think that any of the new movies are any good and can't find anything fun to watch anymore. And, you know, it's lighthearted fun that I'm having at their expense because, quite honestly, I'm them. You know, I'm just as bad at any given moment. All I want, I don't want to see anything revolutionary. I just want a little bit of the hair of the dog that bit me. Now, the dog that bit me back in like 1981. So it's been a while. But I can still find what I'm looking for. And I will say that some of the best horror movies of the 80s came from a pretty unique source. These movies were unrated. These movies featured a lot of gore, a lot of weird, almost slapstick comedy, very satirical in their horror. And also were kind of kinky. There was a bit of nudity in them and a little bit of stuff that was a little bit shocking that people talked about an awful lot. And that's the work of Stuart Gordon. So rest in peace, Stuart. We lost him a few years ago, but his influence is still going. And his influence is still going because he really put the H.P. Lovecraft brand in the forefront of horror fans. We may have read him, but we hadn't seen a really cool, compelling movie made of his short stories. So Lovecraft becomes cool in the hands of Stuart Gordon. And now Stuart Gordon has homage being given to him from various filmmakers. And one of the best that I've seen in a while, best H.P. Lovecraft adaptations, it's really an homage to Stuart Gordon, is Suitable Flesh, directed by Joe Lynch. And Joe Lynch directed Mayhem, a great horror movie from 2017. Once again, very satirical, very gory. So this is right in his wheelhouse. This feels very much like a Stuart Gordon film, probably for some tactical reasons as well, one of which is the screenplay. So the screenplay is based on The Thing on the Doorstep, a short story by H.P. Lovecraft, but it is adapted from that story by Dennis Paoli. And Dennis Paoli did the screenplay adaptations for both The Reanimator as well as From Beyond. So right there we have someone who really understands that special spice that there was inside of the Stuart Gordon movies. And to really hit it right on the head, to really get us back into that feeling of a Stuart Gordon film, we have Barbara Crampton as one of the stars of this movie. Not only is she a star, she's also executive producing. So she has some skin in the game and she really goes at it. So we have this movie, Suitable Flesh, and it is very much a crazy gonzo horror movie right in the wheelhouse of the Stuart Gordon movies. And this is one that not a lot of people got to see. It premiered at Tribeca in 2023. And it had a very limited release. Some people got to see it in the theaters, but most of us had to wait until it came to streaming. So anyway, this is the world of H.P. Lovecraft. So what's the story? Well, the story is that we have a Miskatonic psychiatric hospital, and inside of that hospital, there is a psychiatrist who is now one of the inmates who may or may not have murdered someone, and the mangled, thoroughly torn apart body is in the morgue waiting an autopsy to find out exactly what killed them. But when we see the body, it looks like hamburger. So we assume whatever happened had to be something. So we meet the doctor, who is in a padded cell. This is Dr. Elizabeth Derby, played by Heather Graham, who does a fantastic job, not only balancing comedy and horror, but she's also does a very strong physical performance. So she is in the padded cell, and her friend, Dr. Daniela Upton, who's a contemporary at the hospital, comes to visit her, trying to find out what the hell has happened with her friend. And what we find out is this story. So Elizabeth Derby has her practice. Everything seems to be perfect in her life. She has a hunk of a husband who seems to love the hell out of her, but there's something a little bit off about her. She has this thing of some wanting. Something within her is unfulfilled. One day, while she's at her practice, a young man comes in, feverish, all upset, and he has no appointment, but he begs her that he gives a moment to be able to see her and tell her what's going on, talk to her, because he feels he's going absolutely insane. And he has this feeling that his father is somehow inhabiting his body. So this boy is named Asa, and his father is Ephraim. And he's positive that his father is somehow inside of his body. And while he's telling Dr. Derby this, and she's like, okay, this is just a psychotic break, Asa's phone rings, and he picks it up, and it's his father on the other end. And as he's speaking to his father, suddenly he goes into what looks like a grand mal seizure. He falls on the ground. She's trying to help him, and all of a sudden the seizure stops, and he gets up, not remembering anything that had just happened, as if everything was just fine. But there's something very different about him. Something is strange. Something is like a little bit pervy and off about him as well. He leaves, and it freaks her out. And it freaks her out more than she thinks, because she ends up having a dream about Asa coming to have sex with her. So the doctor does, the only logical thing, which is go to the kid's house, confront the father, Ephraim. And Ephraim is played by Bruce Davidson, and he's just a ton of fun. He is chewing the scenery with this one. Ephraim is this older gentleman who is dying. He's only being kept alive by whatever pills he has in his pocket, and he's evil as shit. He's mean. He threatens her with a knife to get the hell out of the house. So I don't think it's going to be any surprise to anyone that with this little bit of a setup, that there is some kind of transference that's happening between the boy and his father. And when we're in this house with the doctor, she sees all these weird books and stuff, your typical, oh, look, an Necronomicon on the table kind of thing. So we know if something's happening. We get taught a few of the rules, that it's not permanent the first time. But as this transference happens, and it happens to incantations, certain words have to be said 3 times. Once this is said 3 times, the body change happens. And every time the body switch happens, it gets a little bit longer until it is permanent. So we have like this weird familial Freaky Friday going on that goes really dark really fast. If you think you know where this movie's going to go, well, you might be right for a little bit. But towards the end, it really goes down twisted. And that's where the really perverse fun is. There is certainly sexiness that's going on. I think that there's a very interesting story inside of here that's a bit of a commentary on gender and gender fluidity and sexuality around that and confusion around that. And that is done in a very low-key way. It adds to the comedy. It adds to some of the pathos as well. There's a lot of crazy gore in this movie. And one of the other things that this movie does is it evokes the kind of crazy carnage that is in Stuart Gordon's movies. But Brian Yuzna was also his directing producing partner, and Yuzna went on to direct some movies as well. And the end of Suitable Flesh reminds me very much of Return of the Living Dead Part 3, which Yuzna did. And the reason for that is that Yuzna's Return of the Living Dead is full of the same kind of weird, madcap, anarchic chaos that the first Return of the Living Dead had when it was done by Dan O'Bannon. And then somewhere around the third act, it just gets dark as pitch. And if you've seen that movie, you get an idea of where Suitable Flesh is going to take you tonally. Towards the end, I was really stunned at where they decided to go. And I thought it was also the really great ending to this movie. It's the one that needed to happen. Kudos to everybody that's involved in it. I say that one of the killer elite of this year was Suitable Flesh. In 1999, the horror movie The Blair Witch Project premiered, and it broke the internet. It broke box office records for independent films. It was the most successful independent film of all time with its box office. It also probably sold more Dramamine than any other film in history. The Blair Witch Project was the popular beginning of the found footage film. And it's not the first found footage film, but it is the one that truly came up with a template that was repeatable and influential and obviously money-making. And because of that, you had a whole bunch of found footage films that came after that, for better or for worse. There were many people who did not like the idea of the movie. Some felt that it was a cheat. It had this viral marketing program that happened online. Some people did not like the way that the movie was structured. It is somewhat experimental. And in fact, in some ways, I think very experimental, where the actors actually did the photography. They were holding the cameras, they were holding the sound equipment, and they were finding out what was going on from small notes that were left all over the place. And they were in the woods, and it did not have your traditional 3-act system in it. It went a little bit off of the narrative cliff. It was shaky. It was dark. It wanted your imagination to fill in all the holes. And it was that powerful that even now, we're still having the found footage phenomenon. Now, within this past year or two, we've had a few movies that have taken that narrative shift and taken it even further. Movies that no longer even are interested in doing a 3-act structure. Narrative needs to be non-linear. Narrative and time don't seem to matter. It is considered liminal horror. I've heard the term liminal horror bandied about with these movies. They are truly experimental. They are truly strange. They are highly polarizing, to say the least. And I think that they are rather experimental and interesting. I may not be the person that these movies are made for, but I can respect what they've been doing. And I have to say, I am weirdly entertained by them, even though I'm not necessarily sure how much I'm enjoying them while I'm watching them. These are movies that, after the fact, I really appreciate. I appreciate what they were trying to do, but while watching them, oh my God, all I wanted was a little bit of storyline. I wanted something to happen, right? So, if you're listening to this, if you're a horror fan, you probably already know that I'm talking about movies like Skinamarink. Now, Skinamarink is the big one, right? And I will talk about Skinamarink at another time because I think there's enough to talk about with that movie and the response to it, how different generations are looking at it, that it warrants a little bit more than just an inclusion in something called The Killer Elite, where I'm going to have a digest look at it. There's another one that I think is a little bit more palatable than Skinamarink. It's an action film compared to Skinamarink. It still goes in this defiance of narrative, but I think in a logical way it makes more sense. It's more of a marriage of the Skinamarink kind of style of liminal and the Blair Witch Project found footage. Now, if that makes you sound like makes you want to throw up just hearing those two things together, this may not be the movie for you. But damn, if I wasn't impressed by it, even though while I was watching it, it bothered me. It bothered me in more than one way. It bothered me at certain points that I was going, I feel as if I'm not going to get an answer here. You start getting that dread early on. But there was also this thing where I was feeling the dread of the characters palpably. And I think that the setup of the movie is actually kind of brilliant, because it has the old Blair Witch concept, which is, oh, these people disappeared. The footage is all coming from 3 memory cards, the recovered data off them. Not everything was recovered, so already we know we're not going to get the entire story. There are sequences that are recorded over other sequences, and I think that that concept of how the story is going to be told really works for this kind of film. So the film opens with a 911 call coming from the 4 main characters that we are going to meet. They have gone out to the Mojave Desert. But this call is that something is happening, and she's screaming, and we don't know if she's dying. We hear someone in the background getting attacked. And this is where the police go to find these cards. The footage is recovered somewhere deep in the Mojave Desert. So we have 4 people, one being Robbie, an aspiring filmmaker, played by the director, once again, a first-time filmmaker. And he's in Los Angeles, and he takes his friends. His brother Scott comes with him, and his friends are going to make a music video for a friend named Michelle. They're going to go to the Mojave Desert, nice and cheap, predictable ideas for a music video, and they go out in the desert. In the time that they're going to the desert, there are 2 separate earthquakes. Maybe that's related to this, maybe it's not, but it is something that's kind of key in the story. When we get out to the Mojave Desert, everything seems good in the very beginning, but as these movies go, something strange is going. What I liked a lot about the Outwaters is that they make this connection between the land and the madness that's going on, the craziness that's going on. It feels as if there's like an organic something going on. This, if you listen to the show, you know that I have a thing for Algernon Blackwood and M.R. James, 2 writers who spent a lot of time saying, you know, there really is no supernatural. It's parts of nature that we don't understand yet. Nature is supernatural in and of itself. And so if you get far enough anywhere away from civilization, suddenly the rules don't apply anymore. And that is what seems to be happening in the Outwaters. These people just happen to show up in an area in the Mojave Desert that if you're there, shit's going to start going down. Now, we see this once again through 3 different memory cards. And we bounce back and forth. There's a little bit of text that comes on the screen as if this is all evidence from a police station telling you which card it is, what day it seems to have been done, all of this stuff. And we are seeing some of the weird stuff that's going on. At night, we hear these strange booming sounds coming out of the desert. And they seem to be getting closer. And the animals are going wild. You can hear animals screeching and trying to get away. And Scott and Robbie, they go outside of the tent. They try to investigate what's going on. They can't find anything. But Robbie continues by himself because he sees some strobing light along the hillside path. So the next day, of course, they haven't found anything. The next day, they start shooting this music video. And they go out towards where Robbie saw this weird strobing light at night. And as they get up there, they find this hole in the ground. And in this hole, there's this weird, high-pitched noise coming out of it. And there's something unsettling that's happening. Something unusual is happening under the ground. And there's close-ups of ants and stuff scurrying all over the place. And the entire time that they're there, so they're running their cameras off of battery power. So they're ready to change out the batteries. And as they look, they realize their batteries are not draining. There's as much charge, or their batteries are fully charged. It's as if it's not, so they're being powered from something else. So later that night, the crew once again They hear all sorts of weird animal sounds. There's booms. And Robbie decides he's going to wander off. And as he wanders off with the camera, he sees a naked man on top of a hill. And as he gets closer, he sees that the man has an axe. As he tries to run away, the man comes after him. And the next thing we see, Robbie returns to the camp. He gets into the tent, and there's the sound of rain. And it's him bleeding. From there on, things just get weirder. And we see what's happening back and forth. There are moments that I think are really well done in this, considering that this is us watching footage off of these memory cards. Of course, it's going to mean there's longer takes. That's one of the things that can drive older audiences crazy. There's a level of tedium to some of the shots that we see, and they're interspersed with what I would call bleed through. You know, like when you used to record on VHS, every so often you'd have, if you're recording over an old show, every so often the old show would just suddenly be there. Like for some reason there was a blip in the recording and you'd see whatever was supposed to be recorded underneath. There are these moments, and every one of those moments is like chaotic, violent. We just see a body covered in blood rubbing its hands across. There's intestines rolling on the ground. We're not sure exactly what we're seeing. And this weird, unsettling, and disjointed storytelling really starts to get under your skin. I found it really disturbing. And in the end, where the movie decides to go, I was kind of shocked how far it went. And how in the end, after all is said and done, it still comes off like a good, scary M.R. James ghost story, albeit with a lot of blood. So that is The Outwaters. Now, the next movie on my killer elite list is one that I think I can sell to you with 2 words. Lithuanian slasher. Yes, we have a Lithuanian slasher, the first Lithuanian slasher, in fact, probably the first Lithuanian horror film to ever make it out of Lithuania, and it barely did that in the first place. I believe that Shudder bought this film after it had shown in a few film festivals, became kind of a success, a word-of-mouth success in those festivals, and then bought the rights and brought it over here. The name has changed. The name now that it goes by is We Might Hurt Each Other. And it may have had, it has another name, Pensive. Now the name Pensive doesn't come from the emotion that you may feel while you're watching the movie. It's actually the name of a religious object, the Pensive Christ. And these are wooden sculptures that are life-size. They're called Christ in distress at certain points. It's Christ contemplating his time in the Garden of Gethsemane, essentially. And that plays into the story that is inside of this slasher film. But this is yet another first film by Jonas Trukanas. And Jonas has done some TV in Lithuania, and he did a few short films. But this is a hell of a beginning, and it does kind of follow your traditional idea of a bunch of high school kids going to have a graduation party out in the woods at some old house, and things aren't going to go well. But there's a catch to this one. This one goes full in on the idea that the people that we're watching are horrible people. And this movie is essentially a look at just how terrible humans can be when they're under pressure. When push comes to shove, they're going to go for themselves and let everybody else just die. So essentially, you have this character named Marius. He's pretty unpopular. We see him in school. Everybody's going to be invited to this party that's supposed to be happening at this lake. But he's a complete nobody, right? He has very little personality. In fact, his dad is telling him that the thing that he should do is he should get into liability insurance. There's a line there that the father says to the son that is kind of the linchpin to the story or the theme of this movie. And his father just tells him, you should go into liability insurance because this is the age of force majeure, the act of God. Take that into the world of a slasher, right? So what ends up happening is the jock ends up fucking it up. Whatever place he was trying to get ends up not being available. There's a double booking or something such as, and Marius comes to the rescue because his mom is a realtor. And he finds out about this place that she's trying to get rid of, but she just can't get rid of it because it has a bad past. Of course, it's going to be available for this party. So he tells everybody to go there, and suddenly Marius is at least liked by people enough that they're going to go to this place. So they get there, and it's in the middle of nowhere. Somebody recognizes the house by the surroundings. There is this weird circle of these pensive Christs. They don't necessarily look like pensive Christs. They just look like these characters, these people, these wooden sculptures. And immediately one of the people there goes, oh my God, this is where those murders happened. Of course there's murders that happened there. There was an artist there. He made all of these sculptures. He made sculptures of his family as well. But there was a set fire and his family burned alive inside of it. He was burnt severely, but he got away, as you normally do inside of a slasher film, and he went out in the woods. So there it is. There's your premise. What ends up happening? The kids thoroughly disrespect the property. You know, it's almost like the HOA might be what's killing these kids. They've trashed the Airbnb, and now, you know, they're going to have to pay the consequences. What they end up doing is they're looking for wood, and of course, why wouldn't you just grab one of the pensive Christs and take them and start burning them and chopping them up so that you could use them? So what ends up happening? What do you think ends up happening? Well, of course, you start having kids just suddenly disappearing. But they don't just disappear, and it's not just a brutal killing. There is this crazy waylaying that happens in this movie. There's some really disturbing violence, but there's also this thing that I haven't felt since the movie Cub, which I've talked about before. Cub has these Boy Scouts going out into the woods, and they're telling the scary story of a kid, a feral kid who's out there who ends up killing all these people. And of course, he ends up being real. And there's a moment in Cub where you realize that you're not watching a Hollywood version or American independent version of a slasher film. It suddenly goes brutal all at once. And that's what happens in this movie. And We Might Hurt Each Other, they definitely hurt each other. And there is a moment in the movie where you're going, where is this going to go now? Did that just happen? Did all of these people just experience what I think they just experienced? And that's only partway through this movie. To say the least, this isn't just a dark movie. In the end, the final punchline is bleak as hell. And it is really good. It was so good that I went from going, well, this is a predictable horror movie, to going, well, this is a slasher movie that knows exactly what it is. Then went into, well, this is a slasher movie that is really making a nasty social commentary about the selfishness of others. And then the heartlessness of others. And then in the end comes this punchline. And I hope you take the chance and take a look at We Might Hurt Each Other. Well worth your time. So we talked about a Lithuanian slasher that at the center of it all just had the most vile and unlikable main characters, or all characters, quite honestly. Every character in the movie is pretty much unlikable. And you know who does that better than anyone, even better than the Lithuanians? That would be Eli Roth. Now, Eli is someone that I like most of his movies, but Every one of the movies that I like about him, there's always one moment where I just kind of sigh and I go, did we have to get that infantile humor? Well, I think we do. That's just Eli's way. Eli has a twisted sense of humor from what I can tell. It's very Troma-esque. He could make Troma movies if he so wanted to, but his movies are really well made, especially for the small amount of money that many of them were made as. All the way back from Cabin Fever, which cost $1.5 million to make. Hostel, he kept his budget, I think it was a $4 million budget, but his salary was $10,000 that he could keep it going. He kept away from studio intervention of any sorts that he could make the movie that he wanted to make, and I think Hostel's amazing. The thing about it, he's a very divisive director. He's about as divisive as Rob Zombie is, but for different reasons. I think everybody knows that Eli is talented. They just don't think he has good taste. Well, let me tell you, most people that think that way were pleasantly surprised by Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is frickin' fun as all get out. Now, people are saying it's a fantastic slasher film. It's a callback to slasher films. I'm not necessarily sold on it as a slasher film. I look at it more as an old EC comic. There are moments in that movie that are right out of Vault of Horror. You could see Jack Kirby drawing it. It's grotesque and morbid and full of just satirical, absurd humor. Dark humor. And that's Thanksgiving all the way through, and that's what EC Comics love to do as well. Give you a lot of gore, but always have the tongue thoroughly through the cheek, not just in cheek, through the cheek. Now, the genus of Thanksgiving is something that most horror fans know. It started out from 2007, the Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez movie, Grindhouse, which is a double feature movie. In the center, there were a bunch of trailers. And Eli Roth made Thanksgiving, this quick trailer that everyone just fell in love with. They laughed. They thought that was the most grindhousey of all the ones that were there. And since 2007, Eli Roth has been threatening making a full-length film out of it. But he wanted to make sure that he could make a movie that was live up to the amount of love and hype that there was for the trailer. Thanksgiving really does do an amazing job. It is the movie that I think most people were waiting for out of Eli Roth, where somehow the things that normally drive you crazy about his stuff works perfectly with this story. So if you saw Grindhouse and you saw the trailer, you have an idea of what the premise of the movie is. It's set in Plymouth, Massachusetts, the home of Plymouth Rock. And so, of course, they're really big on the Thanksgiving holiday. And what ends up happening is this wonderful social satire in the very beginning of the movie where all of the main characters all show up for the Black Friday sale at their version of Walmart, the Right Mart. And there is a riot that ensues, and people are killed. Main characters that you meet in the very beginning of the movie, played by larger named stars, end up getting killed in this. So anyway, we cut forward a year after the riot, and teenagers who were there during the riot took phone video, and someone's been uploading that phone video. So, of course, people died. There's going to be revenge, right? So systematically, people are being killed, and they're being killed in really funny, gross ways that you would normally get in something like an EC comic. To say the least, this is a lot of fun, and it is gross, just the right kind of gross, and the suspense is actually really good. As I've always felt about Eli Roth, he understands the horror. The thing that drives people crazy about him is the tonal switch. I think that the tonal switch between really silly horror, or silly humor, and the horror aspect usually bothers people a lot. It works perfectly in this movie because you already know it's kind of a satire. What I think why it really works is that Eli Roth channels his inner masshole. So Eli is from Massachusetts, And I lived in New England. I lived in New Hampshire, and I dealt with a lot of massholes. And he, pitch perfect, made fun of the area. People from New England must have loved this movie. The way people's attitudes are, it was so over the top and crazy. I knew we were in the right hands when we see the opening sequence of a house and someone's breathing, walking up towards it. It's very evocative of the original Halloween with the masked killer coming up the steps. But the screen door has a hockey stick for a handle. And when I saw that, I went, oh my God, I know where this guy's coming from. Thanksgiving is the Eli Roth movie that so many people have been waiting for. Back in 1993, I saw this movie on VHS that I was so enamored with. I watched it again and again and again. I couldn't believe that a movie was made that was quite like this. It was so gonzo bizarre and surreal and hilarious and gross, and it had amazing practical effects. It had ridiculous amounts of, I guess you would call it stunt casting. There are people in the movie that you would never expect. Bobcat Goldthwait played a sock puppet, essentially, and all of these amazing special effects were done by Screaming Mad George. And it was just jaw-droppingly amazing to see. And it seemed like nobody had seen it. And it was directed by Alex Winter. Yes, Bill from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Alex Winter directed this movie. And he stars in it, as well as Mr. T and several others. And it was such a unique experience that I kind of felt like, did I see this movie or did I hallucinate this movie? I know I've been drinking a lot, and this does feel like some of the things that I think of when I'm drinking. Has this movie ever been seen by anybody? And of course, Freaked has become quite an amazing cult hit. A lot of people love this movie, and a lot of people will talk about it. Well, I have to tell you, there's another one out there now, and it is one of my killer elite. And Alex Winter is in it. He did not direct this one, but I will tell you that this is the sibling, the love child, I guess, the child of Freaked. And that movie is Destroy All Neighbors. Oh my goodness, this movie. So the premise is that there is this guy named William Brown is a neurotic, self-absorbed musician who's working at an LA terrible small label sound studio, and he's doing the sound engineering for them. But his real love is failing, essentially. He's been trying to make an album of prog rock. He is a prog rock guy, but he wants to take prog rock even further than prog rock has ever gone. He's calling it prog squared. It's 2 times. It's prog to the second degree. And he's making this album forever. And he's in this apartment, and he's just constantly finding something that's going to keep him from doing it. And his long-suffering girlfriend hangs in there with him. What's the new problem he has? Well, the new problem is that in his terrible apartment building, where he has to help the landlord do the work that a landlord's supposed to do, there is a new tenant that moves in next to him. This weird, I don't know, dwarvish kind of guy. He looks a little bit like the lead dwarf in the Lord of the Rings movies. But that's Alex Winter with a bunch of makeup on him. And he's weirdly, I don't know, is he part Scottish, part Croatian? We're not sure what this accent is. But he's this crazy older guy snorting and belching and banging on the walls, and he has a gym set made out of cinder block buckets and chains, and he's just screaming out all of his exercises while this poor kid is trying to do his prog rock in the next apartment. And of course, what's going to happen here? Well, he's going to have a confrontation with this really disturbing guy who just keeps doing all this stuff. But that guy seems to get along with everybody except for our hero. So in a weird way, this is like a really weirdly comic version of like this mixture between Polanski's Repulsion and Abel Ferrara's Driller Killer. We've got this strange movie where during an argument about what's going on in the apartment, William Brown, our fledgling prog rocker, ends up killing his neighbor. Doesn't just kill him, accidentally kind of beheads him. But of course, body doesn't stay dead. And from there on, the movie just gets weirder and weirder and funnier and funnier. And there are some amazing practical effects in here, very much like Freaked. The sense of humor and the style of this movie is very much like what Freaked was. I was really stunned when I looked up the movie and didn't see Alex Winter's name as the writer or director. These guys obviously watched Freaked, and I believe that they are all friends. But it is outrageous. It's an outrageous mixture of horror and comedy and crazy gore, weirdly funny music, a lot of satire about artists and our propensity for failure and the music industry. And I've got to tell you, it is just silly, silly fun. And this is the kind of movie that I will find myself watching again and again and again. And I hope that it gets a cult following, if not a full-fledged following. So, if you liked Freaked, if you love outrageous humor with your horror, I cannot recommend Destroy All Neighbors enough. And oh my goodness, it's that time already. Can you believe it? Time flies when you're having fun and you've just got an obsessive mind that can't let things go and can't help but talk obsessively about movies. So we've talked about, oh my goodness, a half dozen of the movies that I have as the Killer Elite, the best of 2023. We've got so many more to do. So we're going to go to part 2. So this is the end of part 1. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. I hope it has whetted your appetite. And I will have a special thing at the end of part 2, which is where, I don't like having best ofs, but at the same point, I'm going to talk about a few movies that I think really, really shined above all others. Anyway, we'll see you very, very soon. And once again, thank you so much for listening. And remember to stay hell-bent. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/Hellbent for Horror, and my Twitter handle is Hellbent Horror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.